In the early hours of a February morning in 1985, a man is forced into a car on a quiet street in Guadalajara. The city is barely awake and traffic is light. The exchange is fast, practiced, almost routine. Within minutes, he disappears into the city. The man is Enrique "Kiki" Camarena, a United States DEA agent stationed in Mexico. He has spent years doing work that rarely makes headlines, listening, mapping, and understanding how power actually moves when it refuses to announce itself. His abduction is not chaotic, it is deliberate, organized, and approved. But the approval does not come from the men who take him. No, it comes from a system that has learned to defend itself. At the center of that system is Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, a former police officer turned drug trafficker who, by the mid-1980s, has become one of the most influential coordinators in Mexico's criminal underworld. He is not hiding in remote terrain. He is not running from authorities. He does not live like a fugitive. Félix Gallardo moves carefully, but never nervously, because the environment around him still responds to the rules he understands. Routes are regulated, payments flow predictably, political relationships remain functional. Violence exists, of course, but it is controlled, used sparingly, meant to correct behavior rather than provoke attention. This restraint is not accidental, it is strategic. Long before cocaine corridors stretched across Mexico, Félix Gallardo learned power through proximity. As a judicial police officer in Sinaloa, and later as a bodyguard to the state's governor, he observed the state from the inside. He watched how investigations stalled, how files disappeared. He saw how enforcement depended less on law than on alignment. He internalized a critical lesson. Authority is fragmented, but influence can unify it, at least temporarily. When cocaine trafficking expanded from small-scale smuggling into something continental, Félix Gallardo did not rush to dominate territory. Instead, he positioned himself as an intermediary, a problem solver, someone who spoke both the criminal and political languages required to keep things stable. By the late 1970s, Colombian traffickers faced a logistical crisis. The U.S. interdiction had made Caribbean routes unreliable, but the product existed, the market existed. What was missing was a corridor that could absorb the pressure, and Mexico filled that role perfectly. Félix Gallardo offered structure, not ownership, but coordination. Traffickers paid for passage, protection, and predictability. Disputes were resolved centrally. Bribes were managed efficiently. Violence was contained to avoid destabilizing the arrangement. What later became known as the Guadalajara Cartel was not a monolith, it was a negotiated system. Félix Gallardo, alongside Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo and Rafael Caro Quintero, acted less like a warlord and more like an administrator. For several years, it worked. This was not because the system was invisible, but because it was quiet. It did not challenge the state publicly. It did not provoke the United States directly. It survived by understanding the limits of tolerance. That balance began to fail when U.S. pressure increased in the early 1980s. Washington grew frustrated with what it saw as selective enforcement. Cooperation existed, but inconsistently. Intelligence was shared, but acted upon unevenly. Camarena entered this environment differently. Rather than conducting raids, he built relationships. He learned who attended which parties, who introduced whom, which businessmen were nervous and which were confident. He traced not just shipments, but trust. When Mexican authorities raided Rancho Buffalo in 1984, a massive marijuana plantation tied to Caro Quintero, the loss was staggering. But more damaging was what it revealed. The system had been penetrated. From Félix Gallardo's perspective, this was not merely a law enforcement success, it was a breach of the unspoken contract that had kept the peace. Camarena's abduction was meant to repair that breach. The decision-makers believed fear would recalibrate behavior among traffickers, politicians, and investigators alike. What they failed to anticipate was that the killing of a U.S. agent would shift the issue from criminal enforcement to national credibility. Camarena was tortured and murdered. His death reverberated far beyond Guadalajara. In Washington, patience collapsed. The U.S. government applied unprecedented pressure on Mexico, both publicly and privately. Cooperation was now demanded, not requested. Mexican officials found their maneuvering space shrinking rapidly. The protection Felix Gallardo depended on began to erode. Fonseca Carrillo was arrested within weeks. Caro Quintero followed. Their removals were not surgical, they were symbolic. The message was clear: accommodation has its limits. Felix Gallardo remained free for a time, but the terrain had changed. He reduced his visibility. He avoided gatherings. He understood that the system could survive scrutiny, but it could not survive sustained outrage. By the time he was arrested in 1989, his power was already constrained. The arrest itself was quiet, procedural. The real shift had already occurred. Authority was reasserting itself.
Prison, however, did not immediately end his influence. In Mexico at the time, incarceration did not sever command the way it does in more centralized systems. Felix Gallardo retained contact, messages passed, meetings were arranged. From behind bars, he attempted to impose one final order on a fracturing world. He oversaw the division of trafficking corridors among emerging groups: Tijuana under the Arellano Felix family, Juarez under Amado Carrillo Fuentes, and Sinaloa under figures who would later dominate the trade. The intention was containment. The result, however, was competition. Without a central arbiter, boundaries became mere suggestions. Disputes escalated. Violence became a language of legitimacy. The next generation built power not through restraint, but through spectacle. As Felix Gallardo was transferred to higher security prisons, including Almoloya, his reach finally diminished. The state, embarrassed internationally, tightened its grip. Communication became harder, influence decayed. Years passed, legal battles unfolded, and health declined. Felix Gallardo eventually left prison under house arrest, not as a strategist, but as a relic. By then, the system he designed no longer existed. The corridors remain, and the demand remains, but the restraint is gone. Looking back, his failure seems obvious. A centralized criminal system cannot remain stable once it becomes visible. Violence, once introduced as a corrective tool, cannot be permanently controlled. Institutions tolerate corruption, but they do not forget humiliation. Felix Gallardo believed he could manage all three. He was wrong. The chaos that followed was not a deviation from his system. It was its delayed consequence. A structure built to survive pressure eventually created more of it than it could ever absorb. And it all began quietly on a street in Guadalajara when a man was forced into a car and a line was crossed that could never be uncrossed.